Hi everyone, I'm Sean Ferrick for Trek Culture, and welcome back to part 2 of 20 things you didn't know about Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. Number 10, Roddenberry's original starring ship and its tennis connection. One of the ships affected by the whale probe signal is the USS Yorktown. The Yorktown was, of course, the original name for Gene Roddenberry's starship in the pilot for Star Trek, originally titled the Menagerie before being renamed the Cage. The captain of this ship is played by Vijay Amritaj, who was at the time a champion tennis player. By the time he appeared in Star Trek, he had also appeared in another long-running franchise. In 1983, he played the role of Vijay, an MI6 intelligence operative in the James Bond film Octopussy. He would go on to appear in another couple of productions, but these two films have remained his highest profile acting performances to date. Number 9. Star Trek Punk Part 1. Jane Wiedlin cameos in Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home as Trillia, one of the many Starfleet officers who are radioing into HQ for aid. At the time, she was best known for being the lead singer of the punk band The Go-Go's. In the early 80s, however, she and her agent decided that she should try her hand at acting. Her film debut came a year before Star Trek when she appeared as a singing telegram in Clue. She recalled begging and begging for a part in the film, having been a huge Trekkie since childhood. She was cast and went in for her fitting. The uniform, she recalled, was 100% wool and extremely warm. She was allocated a small dressing room, something she likened to a box, waited for hours and hours before her big moment came, as she remembered Leonard Nimoy being a courteous and kind director, walking her through her lines, going so far as to include her scene in the closing credits as well. She counts Star Trek IV as a highlight of her career. Number 8. Star Trek Punk Part 2. Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home arrived in 1986 while the punk scene was still going strong. Kirk Thatcher appeared in the film as the Mohawk-sporting punk who flips Kirk off while on the bus, before getting the nerve pinch from Spock. Thatcher had actually worked on Star Trek previously, having contributed to The Wrath of Khan. He helped with the FX on the SETI Eel, so when he heard that Leonard Nimoy was looking for an FX assistant on Star Trek IV, he lobbied hard for the part. This led him to his dual acting roles in the film. First, he contributed his voice. It is Thatcher's sped-up voice who asked Spock, "How do you feel?" Then, when he heard that they required a punk for the bus, he approached Nimoy. Paramount Pictures had a music licensing deal that gave them access to artists like Duran Duran, though Thatcher recalled telling Nimoy that music like that wouldn't be appropriate at all. He had been a punk in his teenage years. He was 23 at the time of filming, and was able to guide the style of punk on the bus. The scene required 2 takes, thanks to a wardrobe malfunction on the first try. His leather jacket was so stiff that he never felt the nerve pinch. For the music that blares from the boombox, Thatcher offered to compose a song that would suit, which he collaborated on with Mark McGeaney, the sound editor who composed the guitar riff. Number 7. War of the Franchises. At the 59th Academy Awards, Star Trek found itself well represented by Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. However, there was another fledgling sci-fi series that would end up becoming stiff competition for the sequel. Aliens was also released in 1986, storming its way into audiences' hearts and minds. James Cameron's sequel was nominated in almost all of the same categories as Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. Star Trek was nominated for Best Cinematography over Aliens, but other than that, they were competing. They were both nominated for Best Sound and Best Sound Effects, the latter of which Aliens took home the gong for. Ironically, James Horner, who had scored Star Trek II and Star Trek III, declined to return for Star Trek IV. Leonard Rosenman was hired to write the music for IV, while Horner wrote the score for Aliens. Both were nominated for the Oscar for Best Original Score, losing out to Herbie Hancock for Round Midnight. Aliens did in fact edge out Star Trek IV by taking home 2 Academy Awards that year, Best Visual Effects and the aforementioned Best Sound Effects. Number 6. That Eddie Murphy rumour was 100% true. The role that eventually morphed into Gillian Taylor began its life as a device to bring Eddie Murphy into Star Trek. In fact, it was Murphy himself who wanted to be in the film, as he was a huge Trek fan. Though Jeffrey Katzenberg would describe it as either the worst or best idea in the world, there was no denying the appeal of having a performer with Murphy's star power in the picture. Steve Mearson and Peter Crykes began work on a screenplay that featured Murphy. He would play a college professor who was obsessed with aliens, listening to whale songs as he did his research. Murphy hated it and opted to make The Golden Child instead. That film, though a commercial success, was viewed far less favourably by critics than Star Trek was. Catherine Hicks was hired to play the rewritten character, thus Gillian Taylor was born. Number 5. Nicholas Meyer hated the ending. There was an original ending to Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home that sees Catherine Hicks's Gillian Taylor remain on Earth in 1986. She vows to fight for the survival of humpback whales as a species. Despite the fact that this does create a paradox, if the humpbacks survive, there's no need for Kirk and crew to go back in time, writer Nicholas Meyer felt that this ending gave a stronger message. Having Taylor remain on Earth gave, in his opinion, the impression that humanity was actively doing something about the ecological threat, rather than relying on the interference of their future selves to wrap everything up for them. He describes the ending that was released as a fantasy version, one that caters to the idea that the future utopia will wipe everything clean in terms of the sins of humanity. Having no choice but to accept it, he worked on all of the scenes set in the 20th century, while Harve Bennett wrote the end of the film. Number 4. Admiral. It's not the Enterprise. Star Trek IV featured very little of the USS Enterprise, with the self-destruct of the original ship in the previous film. Though the Enterprise A would appear at the movie's close, there is in fact another little cameo, albeit one achieved with set dressing and redesign. Chekhov and Uhura discover that the USS Enterprise, the aircraft carrier, will be able to help them in their mission. They signal this in to Admiral Kirk before beaming aboard. The interior of the Enterprise was in fact played by the 29-year-old USS Ranger, an aircraft carrier that stood in while the Enterprise was out on maneuvers at sea. The filmmakers recalled the professionalism of the crew, all of whom were very real soldiers during filming. During Chekhov's run across the deck, the Marines order everyone else to drop to the ground. Production recalled that they were slightly taken aback at how everyone, from cadets to the higher ranks, complied without question, and were very glad not to have them chasing after them for real. The USS Ranger remained in active service until she was sent to the scrapyard in Texas in 2015. Number 3. It's not the size, it's how you use it. Sulu commandeers, though we never quite find out how, a Huey 204 helicopter in Star Trek IV. This is to solve the logistical problem of their whale tank. It's all well and good to secure the actual panels, but how are they going to get them to the bird of prey in Golden Gate Park? The issue was somewhat shared by the filmmakers. How are they going to capture shots of a Huey in flight over San Francisco? They were told very early on that there was no chance that they were going to be given permission to fly, so how could they capture the shots seen in the film? Resorting to their earlier method of forced perspective that had worked so well for the bridge, the filmmakers simply built a radio-controlled model of a Huey. This allowed them to film it in such a way that it looked as though it was crossing the San Francisco skyline. Likewise, the shot of it rising above the cloaked vessel was simply another shot of the toy. Sulu's Huey never actually takes off from the ground, yet the shots in the film are excellent. Number 2. You've blocked my car. I'm getting a part. Layla Sarakalu plays the part of the young woman from whom Uhura and Chekhov ask directions. She runs her hand through her hair, unable to answer them, and advises them that the naval base in Alameda is most probably across the bay in Alameda. The scene is a funny placeholder that was effectively left in for the hell of it. Sarakalu was not an actor. She'd returned to her car to discover that it was blocked in by the filming crew, and therefore she couldn't leave. Rather than create a fuss, she asked if she could have a walk-on role of the film. For the scene in question, Walter Koenig and Nichelle Nichols attempted to stop random passers-by on the street with their questions. They were observed by a cop, a hired actor, but none of the non-speaking roles have been professionally cast. Crucial there is the term non-speaking, as these were simply extras. Sarakalu's inclusion of the lines actually caused a tiny headache, as they then had to chase after her and induct her into the Actors Guild so that her lines could remain. All agreed that the comedy was worth it, and the scene was left in the film. Number 1. What happened to Lieutenant SAAVIK? Perhaps the character from the original series era of films to go through the most ups and downs behind the camera is Lieutenant SAAVIK. Originating in Star Trek II, played by Kirstie Alley, the character was originally written to be part Romulan. Now, while this aspect was excised by Nicholas Meyer before filming, Alley's performance is still more emotionally led than her counterpart, Robin Curtis. Curtis took over the role for Star Trek III and Star Trek IV. While she is a supporting member in 3, she barely garners a cameo in The Voyage Home. So, what happened? The truth is, SAAVIK fell victim to yet another rewrite, though this one at least explains in part why she chooses to remain on Vulcan. Though she was in no way a part of the conspiracy to steal the Enterprise and therefore would face no charges on return, she elects to stay on her homeworld. In the early drafts of the film, this is because she was pregnant with Spock's baby. She had helped an adolescent Spock navigate his Pon farr while he rapidly aged in Star Trek III. This being a Star Trek film, nothing was shown on screen bar ritualistic hand movements. Yet the idea was for her to be pregnant, thus remain on Vulcan for the birth. However, this was chopped from the script, so as presented, SAAVIK basically stays behind, tells Kirk how David died, and then books it out of there and leaves them to their fate. Now that's everything for our list on the 20 things you didn't know about Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. Did we leave anything out? Let us know in the comments below. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks to you, we are at around 175,000 subscribers. We are aiming for 200 by summer, and I know that you can help us get there, so please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget you can catch us over on Twitter at Trek Culture. You can catch myself at Sean Ferrick on Twitter as well. Until I'm talking to you again, you look after yourself, you look after your friends and family, and you remember, they are not the hell your whales. Thanks very much, guys.